Hello and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today for this Farm and Sea to Campus Forum on Traceability, which is hosted by Farm to Institution New England and the New England Farm and Sea to Campus Network. My name's Tania Taranovski. I'm the Director of Programs for Farm to Institution New England. I'll be moderating this webinar as well as presenting. And joining me today are Andy Cox and Neal Bram. I'll just take a moment to introduce both speakers to you all. Andy Cox is the Director of Dining Services at Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts. His past experience includes General Manager at the Hotchkiss School and Executive Chef at the Harvard Kennedy School, as well as farm-to-table restaurants in Oregon, Chicago, and Boston. He holds a BA from UMass Amherst in Sustainability Management with a certificate in Sustainable Food and Farming. Andy is committed to focused shifts in institutional spend to support regional agriculture through diner engagement and education. Andy's also a key advisor to FINE and a member of our network. He serves on FINE's Network Advisory Council and on the Program and Evaluation Subcommittee. Andy also has been a leader of the New England Farm and Sea to Campus Network since its inception. He's a steering committee member and serves as the chair of the Evaluation and Tracking Working Group. So today's topic on traceability and transparency is near and dear to his heart. Also joining us is Neal Bram. And Neal's the CEO and founder of Project Waste Not, which is a focus of our webinar today. Motivated by the need to reduce waste in the food system, Neal and his team are building a network of service providers that will enable Project Waste Not's food service and food supply partners to reduce the $5 billion in wasted labor and $30 billion in wasted food that occurs every year. But his tool is also something that lends a great deal of advancements to traceability and transparency, and he'll be focusing in on that today. Before working in food tech, Neal spent about 20 years as a strategist, product manager, and a team leader. He collaborates with his customers on defining, testing, and improving products that solve challenging and meaningful problems. And we're excited to have him joining us today. Before we get started, I'd like to just give you a quick overview of what to expect on our webinar today. We're going to begin with a brief introduction to FINE and the Farm and Sea to Campus Network, and also the mechanics of our Zoom webinar. Then I'll be discussing the importance of traceability and transparency and FINE's growing work on these really important topics. Andy's then going to offer an institutional perspective and is going to dig a little deeper into what's happening in the college sector, which is, of course, his area of expertise. And then Neal's going to give us an overview of Project Waste Not in a live demo, in which we'll see how this platform can help serve transparency and traceability in institutional and other supply chains. We'll follow the presentations with a question and answer period, and then we're going to wrap up by 3 p.m. Now, as we get started, I'd like to just introduce you to this webinar platform, Zoom. Hopefully most of you are familiar with it and have probably used it on other webinars before, but we're going to talk about 2 interactive features that we have today. We're going to answer questions after the presentations, as I said, but you're welcome to note any questions you have throughout the webinar that using this Q&A function. So if you toggle over your screen, if you don't see a control, like a control bar yet, you can use your mouse to scroll around and it should pop up. You're probably on the top or bottom of your screen. And you'll see a Q&A button, and you can hit that, and then this box will pop up, and you'll be able to enter your questions here. If you feel so inclined, you're welcome to send them anonymously, but you're also, we're happy to have you let us know who you are and what your questions are. And if for any reason that we don't have enough time to answer all the questions at the end of this webinar, we'll make sure to follow up with you afterwards so that your questions are answered. And you can feel free to direct questions at any or all of our speakers. We also have a chat function that we can use today. And when you hit the chat button, it's going to open this chat box, which you see here on the screen. And you can use that to share comments or other information with those who are attending the webinar today. So you can talk with any of us speaking or with your fellow attendees. And we'd love it if you would actually just take a moment to use the chat box to introduce yourself, typing in your name and organization, and of course, any other information you wish to share. We'd love to hear about what your interests in tracking and traceability are, if there's a particular platform you're using, and then we'll continue to follow up on that as we go through the webinar. I also just want to take a moment to let you know that we are recording this webinar, and that's so that we can post it for later viewing on FINE's YouTube channel. And you're welcome to share or reflect on other webinars that we might have and visit our YouTube channel at any time. So, with the mechanics out of the way, I would like to just introduce you to FINE. Farm to Institution New England, or FINE as we're often called, is the backbone organization for a 6-state network of nonprofit, public, and private entities who are all working to mobilize the power of regional institutions to transform our food system. We work to increase the amount of good local food that's served in our region's schools, hospitals, colleges, and other institutions. And for more information about FINE, you can explore our website at farmtoinstitution.org. The New England Farm and Sea to Campus Network, which is also co-hosting this webinar, is a community of higher education and food system stakeholders who, in coordination with FINE, are connecting, sharing, and collaborating to develop transparent regional supply chains and to educate campus communities about regional food systems. Our webinar series provides an opportunity for anyone to connect, share, and learn about farm to campus issues in New England, although many of the issues that we're tackling go well beyond the campus sector and are relevant to the entire farm to institution network, as we think today's webinar is. All right, so I'd like to get started now going into today's topics, which are traceability and transparency. And I'd really like to start just by offering definitions for both. So these are common terms, they're very familiar, but there is definitely complexity to each of them when it comes to how they play out in the food system. So I think it's worth taking the time to talk about what our definition is. And I really think that there's a great definition for traceability as it pertains to food and the food system, which comes from experts in this area, the Global Food Traceability Center. If GFTC is a group that you're not familiar with, I highly recommend that you check out their website. They have a lot of great tools and resources, and as I said, a lot of expertise in this area. They define traceability as the ability to track the forward movement of a product through specified stages of the extended supply chain and trace backward the history, application, or location of that product. So at any point in the supply chain, one should be able to provide the relevant details of that product. Now, this seems straightforward enough, I'm sure, but it does get complicated. There can be business-sensitive information that people don't want to share, and not everyone agrees on what information is important to transmit. And even when they do agree, there can be a lack of consistency in how that information is described or provided. And really, these are just a few of the complicating factors. So this brings us to the second definition that I want to share, which is on transparency. There is a growing demand for greater transparency in the food system. As I'm sure most of you are, if not all of you are aware, people want to know what they're eating and they want to feel good about it. But transparency isn't possible without traceability. On the other hand, transparency can also help break down some of the barriers to full traceability. So these two issues go really hand in hand. To track a product, you have to know where it's been, and you have to know who's been involved and what's happened to that product along the way. So here I'm sharing a really rather simplified version of a local food value chain. It identifies a number of the different touch points and actors involved in this, from inputs to production, processing, distribution, and of course, finally to the institutions and the consumers that they serve. And of course, throughout this whole value chain, there's various times and places that transportation and storage come into play, and we're talking potentially quite a number of other actors involved in these aspects as well. So although I would think that for most people, farm to institution value chains might seem a little less complex than other food systems. For example, I've worked a lot in the seafood world, and we know it's very complex there. And in farm to institution, you know, a lot of buyers do know their farmers. So at the face of it, it seems like it would be less complicated and traceability less of an issue. But there are actually still many touch points and therefore opportunities for information to become lost or difficult to follow, especially considering the earlier data management challenges I already mentioned. So what should we be doing about that? Well, there are an increasing number of people, businesses, organizations, even funders working on traceability, which is encouraging. FINE's current goal is to assess these existing and developing resources and their applicability to local food procurement needs, particularly as it pertains to New England and to farm-to-institution supply chains. We're really looking to dive into what's going on in these areas, and we aim to share best practices, resources, and other information across our network. This closer look into traceability and transparency arose out of FINE's efforts to better understand local food procurement, particularly in the campus sector. Back in 2015, FINE surveyed campus dining operators in New England. It was the first survey of this kind. We included a question about how colleges and universities are tracking local products, and we were actually really surprised to learn that 35% of our respondents said they were not using any kind of tracking tool to track their local food purchases. Now, this doesn't mean they weren't using any tracking tools at all, but they weren't using them when it came to local food. Now, in 2018, we conducted a second survey. So the first was in 2015, the second was in 2018, 3 years later, and we asked the same question, and the number of people saying that they were not using a tracking tool for local food purchases went from 35% all the way down to 20%, which you can see reflected in this graph. And that was exciting to us because we see that that's improving and there's an uptick in people tracking local food. Some of the other things that we learned, which you can see in this graph, is that the most commonly used tool for tracking was a customized tool or a spreadsheet, and this is especially true for self-operating dining campuses. Other tools that were being used include distributor reports and various software tools, and a number of institutions were also reporting using platforms such as AC Stars and Real Food, and in probability they were using these in combination with various tools. So they were given the opportunity to answer this question with more than one response. So you could see someone using Real Food as well as a customized spreadsheet tool, as well as distributor reports. So it's good to see that traceability is improving, but there's still a lot of work to be done. 20% or a fifth of folks who are not tracking local food is still a big deal. So over the years, and since doing these initial surveys, FINE's developed a number of resources that provide additional information on traceability. We have reports listed here that include those that are summarizing our findings from our 2 campus dining surveys, as well as another short report on tracking systems, and then a more in-depth guidebook for campus dining around tracking. Although this was developed with information from the campus sector, like I said, there's a lot of information here that's relevant and useful, we hope, to other sectors as well. We'd love to hear what folks think about that. So please send us your feedback if you're using these tools at all. In addition to our reports, we have a number of webinars related to traceability, and I'd like to draw your attention to the second one on this list, the velocity reports. This webinar is one of our more popular webinars, and it has really practical information on how to make the most of these reports when it comes to local food tracking. All of our webinars can be found on our YouTube channel. You just go to YouTube and type in Farm to Institution New England, and you'll find these and all of our other webinars there. And we're also part of the National Metrics Collaborative, which has also hosted a webinar series on tracking. And so we encourage you to check them out and check out those webinars. So, where is FINE taking this work? In terms of process, as a network organization, it's really critical that we engage our stakeholders. So we're really looking to hear from you all and from others, not on the webinar, of course. We're looking to hear from stakeholders to find out what's important to them, where are some of the gaps in the information that they may need, the tools and resources that could be useful, and then we aim to share that information out. We're looking always to collaborate with others who are working on these issues as well. So as I mentioned, there are a lot of groups working on traceability and transparency, and we'd like to find out who those folks are and make sure that we're collaborating to add value into what already exists or to fill in the gaps that are there. In terms of the outputs that we're hoping for, we're currently working on a project that is defining local and regional for the New England area. So this is an ongoing body of work, but we're also planning some new efforts, including a consideration of developing key data elements and critical tracking events. And these are basically to help with that issue I talked about earlier, in which sometimes knowing what to track and having agreement and consistency on that is part of the challenge. So looking into what are some ways that we can improve that, and developing key data elements and critical tracking events could be part of that. And we're also wishing to continue to highlight different tracking tools that people might find useful, including Project WasteNot, which we're focusing on today. So at this point, what I'd like to do is hand things over to Andy Cox of Smith College. As a dining director and one with really ambitious goals for sourcing local, healthy, and sustainable foods, Andy's dealing with all of these issues in his daily work. So to help take us from the theory to the real world, here's Andy.
Thank you, Tania. Yeah, so I was fortunate enough to be part of the working group that was working on the college reporting. We wanted to do a deeper dive. We got the 2015 data saying, over a third of the schools weren't tracking local food. Everybody was using different methods. We're also wanting to do like a comparative analysis of the different types of tools out there, like AC Stars or Real Food Challenge, or vendor-specific ones like Bon Appetit has or Exo has. So we did a case study on 10 different colleges, looking deeply at what those colleges use. Some of them were large universities, some of them were private colleges. There was contract managers, there were self-ops, just to get a mix of what New England looked like, and then did an individual case study on each of those colleges to find out who's using what tools are working the best. And what we found is, you can go to the next slide, is that most people weren't even using one tool to try and get all the data they needed. Schools were using 2 or 3 different methods. So if you were doing Real Food Challenge, you might only be looking at 2 months out of the year to get a snapshot of what your local purchasing looked like. And if you were working for a contract food service company, you had to use that criteria, but your institution might have different goals that you're tracking side by side. So it became very clear that this landscape was really challenging. You can see just from the responses of the colleges, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. The reporting is inconsistent. I don't know about you, but I source from over 50 different places to get my food, and I think most colleges are at least in the double digits. Can you go to the next slide too? And when you're looking at data from a lot of different places, it can get really challenging. Even if you have access to the online portal and can pull the report yourself, what column the weight of the product and the cost of the product are going to show up in. But it also requires dozens of emails and follow-up to try and get the reports you need in a format you can use that you can edit yourself. So just like getting standardized data is sort of an impossibility that takes a lot of time to make into a usable format. I know that I've gone in and spent weeks trying to get the data. It usually starts in July. By August, I have most of the data, and then I spend probably about 4 hours a day for a week trying to just code it all with the criteria that we want to sort by. And as many of you know, what the Fine College report, the college survey that they did, there was 13 different categories that they wanted you to track food in, from poultry or beef or produce and beans and grains. But all the different reporting tools require different categories. So can you go to the next one? So I found it really challenging. So I've sort of done a worst case scenario and gone through and sort of tagged all of the food, because my vendors aren't necessarily tagging things differently from within dry goods. If I need to know if it's an oil, a nut, or a bean, it's all just coming in as sort of dry goods. So it takes a lot of time to sort of make it categorized in a way that you can pull out, even see how much beef you're buying year over year. And this can make, seasonal changes, or even, doing some comparative analysis to know where you have opportunities to improve your purchasing. It makes it really challenging. So one of the things I was looking at was, trying to find a format that would bridge the gap between all of the different disparate data sets I get from my vendors, and be able to play with that data more easily. Because once I have it, It's become a great resource for my institution, for student projects, for Vine projects, for faculty to get to understand, how college makes its own purchasing decisions. So can you go to the next? And so we have a lot of different reporting that we have to do. We are members of the Real Food Challenge, and that does require 10 different categories of food but also 4 different criteria for what counts as real food. We also just recently started using something called CMAP. It's the Sustainability Indicator Management Analysis Platform. It's coming out of UNH. It's designed to understand the scope 3 emissions of the college. So outside of like the energy used on campus or the fleet used on campus, it's, what are the life cycle analysis, carbon, responsibilities of the college outside of that. So that involves all the food that comes in, as well as, the books that are purchased. So it's, a platform that is starting to look at the whole impact of the institution from a higher sustainability metrics. And they're requiring 18 different food categories. And they require any processed food to have 3 different categorizations on that. So if we were to buy, a pork dumpling, we would have to label it as pork and grain for the wrapper and, vegetables or oil or whichever is like the 3rd highest ingredient. So, it takes a lot of time to sort of tag every single food purchase in this system to get a real sense of, what is the intrinsic carbon and nitrogen that the college is responsible for this. So AC Star has just changed their criteria. They're on to 2.1 right now, and they're not even counting local anymore unless you do Real Food Challenge. They care more about whether or not it's a plant-based food versus an animal product. So I have spent a lot of time trying to find solutions to this, and I think I found a great partner in Neal, and I will turn it over to him to sort of explain where reporting can go in the future.
Great. So when I listen to Andy talk, and frankly, when I talk to a lot of people in the industry, data is a problem. There's a need for data. And it creates many different problems, and it really fundamentally comes down to the different systems used, whether it's the systems used at institutions, the distributors, all the way down to the growers. They really don't communicate very well with each other. And because of that, there's these barrier blockages. Fundamentally, that's the challenge with traceability. Is if these systems don't communicate with each other, it's hard to go forward and backwards and understand more about where your food is coming from. So let's go ahead and look at the next slide. And it is a real problem, right? We estimate conservatively that it causes $70 billion worth of problems. And that really does hurt our communities. It does make it hard to buy locally. It has significant environmental impacts, especially when you consider logistics inefficiencies and all the energy and resources that are going into growing food that never really makes it off the farm, right? All this adds to costs, which makes it harder, which hurts those who have reduces food accessibility, and it really makes it hard for a number of different parts of the community to really serve healthy and sustainable food. Let's look at the next slide. So we sat back and we view this as a data problem. And really, it's a barrier to the flows of data. So we went out and we built what we're calling the Open Food and Beverage Commerce Network. And really, what it's really designed to do is just work with the plethora of systems out there to make it easy to pull data out of those systems and make it available to whoever would find it valuable. And we're very sensitive to some of the concerns about who could see what data. There's lots of controls built in. So it really makes it easy for growers and shippers and distributors to participate in the system because the parts that are most sensitive to them are well protected. But they can free up and share the parts that really help improve the food supply chain. And so we talk a lot about data, right? And it's not just about traceability, it's about the solutions that once we understand more about where our food is coming from, what are the solutions to help us buy more locally or help us buy more sustainably or whatever it is your individual goal. What can we do to make our logistics more efficient? So we're burning less carbon getting the food to our locations. And what that requires for the innovators is data. They need access to that data to sit there and say, okay, maybe I could build a really intelligent algorithm to help make the logistics more efficient. Or maybe I could build an availability guide to help everyone in New England know what's growing right now and available right now in New England from local farms. Or really absolutely nothing to do with sustainability, but it does have to speak to affordability. Can an innovator come along and use that data to create financial services products that improve cash flows and lower costs? All that requires data and information. And what we're doing is pulling all that information together from the different players in the supply chain. I'll give you one more example that Andy has shared with me in the past. He's talked about a project involved designed to help local dairies in New England. And he identified, or he shared that part of the project, identified that shredded mozzarella is a potential opportunity where enough of it's purchased in New England alone that if you had a local facility, that could really help drive the local market. But the pain point in the project, or one of the pain points of the project, was how much time and effort and energy it took to identify that basic opportunity. If we've connected the growers and the distributors and the end buyers, in a matter of a few clicks, we can tell how much shredded mozzarella is purchased in a given region. Is there an opportunity there? We can start to build tools and algorithms to identify even more opportunities. And so that's fundamentally what the Open Food and Beverage Commerce Network about. And that's fundamentally what we're about, is building those connections so we can free the flow of data and build innovations. So let's look at the next slide here. So the application I'm really going to focus in on talks about sustainability and traceability. And really this speaks to this need for accurate and timely data to know where your food is coming from. You know, looking at one of the charts, I noted that roughly 90% of the respondents said, hey, my definitions for sustainability are different than others. Or just getting the information from vendors is very challenging. Or maybe 60% plus said, hey, I don't necessarily have the staffing to do this. An automated sustainability report can really help with that, and I'll show you that. And I'll take it one step farther. I actually looked on the ASHE STAR reports last night for the first time. And I was looking at one of the schools who we actually have a lot of visibility into their supply chain. And it was interesting how their reporting was actually inaccurate. They had understated the amount of local produce that they had purchased. And we could see that in a matter of a couple of clicks. So let me go ahead and jump right into the demo here. So we're looking at just one application in the network, and this is an application that basically enables an institution, a buyer, in this case, we just gave it a name, Genco Corp, to go in and look at their sustainable purchases and maybe also have access to an availability guide and an ordering tool to purchase more locally. So in a matter of a few clicks, they could pull information from their suppliers and see their total purchases as well as their sustainable purchases for any given time period. So I'm just looking at the last 4 months. And right now I have no sustainable definition set up. So the first thing I'm going to show you is how, with a couple clicks, you could set your own definition for sustainability. So let's just start with 250 miles. And as fast as that, you now can see how much of your products were purchased within 250 miles. You want to change your definition, or if your definition is different, we can go to 500 miles. And again, what we view as our core value is we make this data available. We provide this tool, but if someone else wants to build a tool like this, we're happy to share the data and work with them to have access to the kind of information that allows us to have traceability and sustainability. And I'll just walk through quickly some other screens here. So, because this data can be cut a number of very interesting ways. Here we were asked to cut this where we're just looking of my sustainable purchases, what items are contributing to that. So, in other words, you have sort of broccoli 18s being 66% of the product that was purchased within 500 miles. So you can look through and see what are you buying sustainably and what percentage of that product, what percentage does it make up of your sustainable purchases. The report that we find is most useful is basically an item sustainability report. So you can sort it in a matter of a few clicks any way you want: alphabetical, percent sustainable, total purchase, and quickly sit there and say, all right, well, why don't I have a greater percentage of my purchase being sustainable? And you can look quickly and go, okay, well, here's a chunk. I buy a lot of almonds. Well, maybe almonds just don't grow well in New England. So maybe that could trigger some thoughts. Well, what else can I put on my menu? What can I substitute that with? Whereas maybe lettuce 24s are a bit of an opportunity. And so again, the exact nature and form of this page and the data that's shared, it can be customized, can be delivered in a number of different ways. But the point is, we can address those big pain points that Andy talked to with a few clicks, right? It's easy to set your own sustainability definition. We're pulling the information from your vendors so they don't have to spend, you don't have to wait for them. And frankly, for a lot of them, it takes them a tremendous amount of time to respond to those emails and those requests. And obviously a lot less staff time to put these reports together. But let's take a look at how we can make some of this information actionable too. By building this network, we also have a lot of insights as to what is available locally, what's not available locally. And so we also provide essentially a real-time availability guide and ordering tool, right? And this becomes a great way. We hook up the vendors and can quickly come in and see, all right, for Genco, San Francisco isn't really local, right? And we can actually populate this with distance. Unfortunately, we turned this off for a little rework before doing the demo. But you can see, you can populate with distance, you can populate with availability, populate with price. We can use really any criteria that is of interest. And we can come in and see, you know what? There really aren't any almonds available locally. But you know what? There are lettuce 24s available locally. And let's just go ahead and we can make a purchase. Maybe there's not a lot. And just to show how real time this can really be, let's take a quick look at our dashboard again. And let's just note that about $16,100 of our product was sustainably purchased. I'm going to go back here and we're going to buy 30 cases of lettuce that's local. We submit that order, and what essentially just happened there is we just sent that order directly to the grower. So it reduces some of the manual process, it demonstrates the integration, but as we come back, you can see that we've also, in real time, have updated your sustainability reports. So you really can make real-time purchases and get the data as soon as you need it. I want to show you one more sort of quick example of an integration that has potential value. So I'm going to switch over here, and this is actually a system used by a number of growers and some distributors that we're fully integrated with. And essentially, I'm going to mimic what they might do, so you can see how far upstream we can trace this. So if they get an order from their customer, let's say their customer is an institution, a company for their cafeteria. We'll call it simplified software. And they, in this system, and I apologize, the system can be a little bit confusing, but in this system, you know, they would start to create a PO by typing in the product they want, lettuce 24s. By building out a network, we can actually integrate into this system, and with one click, they can come over and actually see what's available for lettuce 24s that they can buy to source locally for their customer. These are the farms that would have that product available. So we go from the customer to the distributor to the farm, the entire supply chain all being integrated with real-time data showing that there's product available and where they should purchase. So in this case, let's say they purchase 10 cases here. So again, we're sending the order directly to the farm. And if you come back and look at the efficiencies, we've started to populate more data into their system in terms of who they decided to buy from and what their costs are. So the value, you can really sum up the value of a data exchange network of integrating the food supply chain with this concept of delivering a food is great. It's a great ask. It's a great value for your suppliers. It's the critical value. But when they add food plus data, when they're also providing data and freeing the flow of data, it can make your operations more efficient, but it could also make the entire supply chain more efficient. And with that, I'll turn it back over.
Thanks, Neal. All right. At this point, what we'd like to do is we would like to head into our question and answer period, and we want to make sure that you all have plenty of opportunity to ask questions of any of our speakers. Feel free to direct any of your questions to anyone in particular or just in general, and we'll field those. And you can do that by submitting your questions into the Q&A box. So just type right in there and we'll take those questions. So while we're giving people a chance to do that, I'd like to just sort of kick things off. Let you see our lovely faces again so you know who's talking. And I'd like to just sort of kick things off and ask, start with Neal, but this question is really for both of you. And that is, you know, if people are intrigued by what they've seen and they're interested in learning more and potentially giving a shot to see what this kind of tool could do for them, what would be some of the next steps they could take?
So obviously, you're always welcome to reach out to me, and we can really talk about your specific needs and your specific supply chain. But really, I like to encourage sort of building a movement. It's a lot about setting that expectations with your suppliers. That concept of delivering food to me is great. That is incredibly valuable. But what's even more valuable, which will really strengthen our relationship, is if you could deliver food plus data, if you could free up that data. It's really about us all working together to say, hey, let's get that data flowing so we can make our supply chain, our food supply system stronger and better.
And Andy, can you tell us a little bit more about what you're thinking you might be able to do at this point with something like Project Waste Not, or what are you hoping for next steps?
Sure. Yeah, I've actually introduced Neal to a number of my current distributors. He's had conversations that have ranged from, oh, you want data, just tell us what kind of report you want and we'll make that, to people who are generally interested. And, you know, it seems like there's a number of distributors who get it, who understand the benefits to the end user, the institutions like us. And I don't think I have enough I haven't been able to catalyze any of them into saying, yeah, we're just going to buy this and implement the system because Smith wants to. So I'm sort of taking two approaches. I've talked to peers who are also interested, who are also in sort of the wheels turning portion of like what collective vendors can we start pressuring. But more directly, I'm rewriting an RFP, a request for proposals for all of my produce, as well as with Mount Holyoke College. So we're intending to go to market saying specifically that we need reporting portals that have this criteria. Project Waste not being a solution that we are already okay with them using, but if they can create it on their own, but just sort of going to market saying you can have all of our produce for 2 whole colleges, and seeing if that is enough of a leverage point to get a distributor to adopt this.
That's great. So I think either one of you would be more than happy to field questions or interest from other folks too, to either join in to learn more about the kind of collective sort of effort you're talking about, Andy, or to just learn more about one-on-one what Project Waste Not might do for an institution
and
or a distributor or anyone else in the supply chain. Sorry, Neal, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, it'd be great even just to raise your hand and say, hey, this is stuff we're interested in. We're at least willing to have a conversation with our distributors. So while the focus of what I talked about was all about sustainability, the network is coming to New England anyway. It's coming for reasons that have nothing to do with sustainability, because there's some national restaurant chains that want their distributors to be integrated into what they're doing. But that opens up the opportunity, and in some cases it may open up the opportunity to be as simple as saying, hey, I want this, because we're already doing all the work and the distributor's already doing all the work. And so it just almost becomes a, hey, can we create some awareness of who else wants access to information?
Sarah, if there are questions that are coming in, let me know. Feel free to jump in at any point with any questions that you have. And in the meantime, I do have another question for you, Neal. So if there was an organization that was a business that was interested in, let's say a buyer's interested in also another type of value that you didn't currently have listed. You listed miles, distance as one option, organic as another option, family farm as another option. What if someone's interested in sort of a particular certification or some other value that exists out there? Is that something that can easily be built into the system?
Yeah, so it varies a little bit depending on what that metric is. But if that data is collected, in other words, if there's an organization that's certifying, where we can go out and get that information from that certifying organization, we are in the process of doing that with some other metrics, then of course we can match it up and say, hey, is a particular farm or is a particular distributor certified by that organization, and automatically calculate that metric into it. There are others that frankly can be a little bit harder. We can do it, and we're open to, and we're excited about incorporating as many metrics as possible and as many metrics as are interesting to the users. For us, if the data is available, we'll get it in there.
That's great. And one more question I'd like to have you answer, if you don't mind, Neal, is, I think that this concern that distributors have about sharing sensitive business data, I think I'd love to hear a little bit more about how it is that your system makes sure to both promote transparency while also protecting that kind of sensitive data.
Right. So first, philosophically, right, we recognize that, and to get participation, you have to recognize that sensitivity. And in some cases, frankly, that does mean we agree to inhibit the flow of some data that would be ideal for increasing transparency. But we view it as a very iterative process. Let's get the distributors using it. Let's get them comfortable. Let's be respectful of what their business concerns are. And over time, what we found is that they're already saying, oh, wait, I started sharing a little bit of data, and I see the value in that. Let me share some more data. Let me share some more data. So philosophically, we're very open to this iterative approach of let's meet them where they're at. Let's start to build the connection, and then let's show that there is mutual value in this, and then there just comes a lot more comfort. Technically, really what it comes down to is we build in visibility controls where they could set on key data elements like product availability, price, inventory levels, supply chain. They could set things like anyone could see that data, only approved customers can see that data, or customers can only see data that's specifically relevant to them. And that really gives them the ability to set some very granular controls that still get them comfortable, but and encourages them to start sharing that data. And then, like I said, over time, they start reducing those controls and opening up to more and more data sets.
We have one more question to ask, and that is, would it be feasible to modify this data system to connect institutional and hospitality sectors with composting facilities and food banks? Great question.
Yeah. The system is set up to be really incredibly flexible. Part of what motivated us to start this, and frankly, we haven't gotten there yet, is we wanted to collect the data set so we could start to build algorithm tools that identify automatically for a buyer or supplier, anyone who's got inventory that's sitting there saying, hey, I bought 2 pallets of lettuce. We know lettuce lasts X number of days. You bought it Y number of days ago. You probably need to get rid of that in the next day or two. And then look at your usage pattern or your sales pattern and say, you're not going to sell it. You're not going to use it, and trigger an automatic process where it can go to be used, whether it's one of the growing number of online marketplaces to handle seconds or ugly or produce that otherwise would go to waste, whether it's to get it to really any place, right? And so looking at compost facilities, that would just be an extension of that idea, an extension of really why we built it. And we're really just looking for use cases and to grow the network more before that, so we really can get back to working on that more.
Great, thanks, Neal. Any last words that you'd like to share?
For me, I just encourage everyone, if you need more data, ask for it. If you need you want to help define what your needs are, feel free to ask. Happy to help talk through what those needs are. But really, I think it's going to take all of us saying data is valuable to really move the needle and get that data flowing to improve our supply chain.
Good point. Andy, any last words from you?
No, I mean, if you're interested in partnering up to, create a higher dollar leverage against any New England suppliers, let me know.
Great, thanks. Well, I would like to just take a moment to share a few other upcoming events that FION is going to be involved with a little bit down the road, but we are planning our Campus Farmer Summit, which will take place February 22nd, and that's going to be at Stonehill College in Easton. This is going to be our second Campus Farmer Summit. The first was held a couple of years ago and kicked off a great body of work looking at what campus farms do in terms of inspiring the next generation of leaders in the food systems world. So take a look at our website for more information on that event, and hopefully we'll see you joining us there too. We're also hosting a number of other webinars. First, I want to mention one that's being hosted by a partner organization, the Chesapeake Foodshed.net. That is tomorrow, and this is on the role of contracts in food procurement. So the contracts between food service management companies and institutions, and how those can be better utilized to actually promote the kind of values you want to see in your food purchases. So take a look at that webinar if you get a chance. It's going to be a great one. We also then are going to be hosting 2 additional webinars in our product spotlight series. And this series of webinars is one that's meant to dig into those product categories that tend to be some of the hardest for people to find good sourcing options for locally. So our first was on seafood. That one is on our YouTube channel if you want to take a look at that. That was from a little over a month ago. And coming up in November, we'll have one focused on grains. And then in December, we'll be talking about meat. So both will be really a couple of great lineups of speakers there too. We also would really love to encourage you to continue to connect with us. I think that whether it's on traceability or other procurement issues, there are a lot of different opportunities to think about these kinds of topics, to connect with your peers and learn from them, to develop new connections. And you can do that by joining a working group, which is part of the campus network. You are also welcome to join the listserv, which is for campus dining operators and folks that are very involved in that kind of work. Sorry, not just campus, institutional dining operators. We're also really welcome any input via email, so you can feel free to email campus@farmtoinstitution.org. We'd love to hear from you about what would be of interest to you in terms of upcoming information. And hopefully you'll join us at one of our events as well. And of course, there's always social media, so we can see you there too. Finally, if you need to reach out to me, again, my name is Tania Taranovski. I'm happy to field any questions or suggestions, and I really look forward to seeing some of you at our next webinar. So thanks again for joining us. Thank you to Andy and to Neal for contributing such great information on traceability and transparency, and for sharing your information with us. And I also want to thank Sarah Lyman, who's our Finance Communications Manager. She's been silent on this webinar, but helping behind the scenes. So thanks very much to everyone who participated, to all of you for joining us. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. We look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.